What's up, spooky friends? Welcome back to what promises to be another potentially rambly episode of That Spooky Life. I'm Miranda, your spectacular host. I hope that you guys have been having a lovely October. It is now, as of today, November 1st. I hope that your Halloween or Samhain was lovely. And I wish you a happy All Saints Day or Dios de los Muertos, whatever it is that you celebrate. This week has been crazy. I appreciate everybody who's been listening to the podcast and submitting stories. I have some fun things for everybody today. I actually woke up to a super foggy morning this morning. It was beautiful and really difficult to drive into the day job. I was in my feels about, oh, it's okay spooky during the Halloweeny times. I love it. So obviously I record this a little bit before so that I have time to edit and take out the ridiculous number of ums that I say. But it's been a fun time for trying to manifest goals and trying to manifest the side hustle into the main hustle. Today I actually had a very strange experience while I was putting the little one down for bedtime. It had gotten quiet. She was starting to doze off, and behind me in her room, I heard a male voice say no. So it was very strange. And then I heard, I'm not entirely sure what it was. It was laughter, but it wasn't malicious. I didn't get a bad feeling. It was just, I'm pretty sure my ancestors chilling as the tiny one was going to bed. So, and it's just, indicative of living that spooky life. So here we are. And I was like, I should go ahead and record tonight, I think, while this is fresh on my mind and I can share it. Personally, I've been trying to get back into practice, and I've been doing my meditations and exercises that historically have worked very well for me. While it is November 1st for you, and I've already mentioned I'm recording ahead of time, I have a couple of different plans for Samhain, and I'm actually really looking forward to a new experience, going with some friends down to Atlanta to a group that they work with. Not going to drop any names just yet because I'm not sure if they're comfortable with that, but it's supposed to be a family-friendly ritual and fun times for witchy people, which I'm excited about. Additionally, with some friends that I have been working with for years and are very dear to me, we are getting together on Samhain evening. I don't know what all is on the docket for that yet, but I'm very excited, and probably next week I will share with you what wonderful witchy things I got up into this Halloween season. I don't know if you're feeling it, but I certainly am, that the veil has thinned. In my personal experience, my mediumship is far more mental and clairvoyant. I have seen things most of my life, either be it physically or in my mind's eye, but I don't tend to be terribly clairaudient, which is hearing the whispers, hearing somebody say things, etc. But recently, we were going through divinations and just ritual practice stuff, and a friend of mine warned me that with a particular drought that I imbibed, I may see spirits more. Well, they said it could last for a couple of weeks, and they said it could, who knows, be permanent. It was one of those that, depending upon the person, it tended to have a different effect. And while that was not necessarily the goal of what we were doing, it was a potential side effect. And so for the first few weeks, let me tell you, I have never been clairaudient in my life, unless it was a particularly intense situation, spirit, haunting, something of the sort. Well, for 2 weeks, I saw and heard and was having one of those moments where everywhere I went, there was something new. It was very strange. However, now it seems that while most everything has settled back into a normal pattern, it seems that clairaudient has been added to things that I get to experience. So that is both cool and interesting, I suppose. I'm getting used to it. I will be more appreciative of it as time goes on. There is very much a growing pain happening right now. But, you know, new tools in your toolbox, new ways to be able to interpret and see the world. And it's slightly awkward at the moment, but hopefully it will be getting better as we go. Personally, I've been doing just a lot of meditation and a lot of self-reflection. There have been some interesting things come up for me that have prevented me from being able to divine for myself. I had a friend call me out of the blue and say, "Hey, don't read tarot for yourself right now. I'm not sure why." And I said, "Well, that's interesting. I've been getting a lot of doom and gloom recently." And she was like, "Yeah, that's that's something going on with you right now. Just better to have somebody else do it for you. If you need divinations, I would be happy to do so, or ask other people that you know if you feel the need. But just don't do it for yourself right now." And I felt that was fair. I'm all about listening to not only my intuition, but the intuition of others. It was a lesson I learned very early in life that you can learn from your own mistakes, but you can also learn from the mistakes of other people and save yourself a lot of heartache in a lot of situations. So currently, while I am happy to read the tarot or divine for others, I am not divining for myself. Unfortunately, that was one of the things that I was doing to try and make sure that I do something a little bit witchy every day. Try to do one or two things every day. And pulling a tarot card or 3 or 10 was one of the things that I had been trying to make sure that I did. Well, when that was taken away, I was like, okay, what else do I have in my toolbox? Meditations, both calming and purifying, but also blockage removing, etc., are some of the things that I have been doing. And it's been going really well, actually, I think. There's been a lot of coincidental things happening, which after a point you no longer believe are coincidence. I have also decided that next year in 2020, I am going to be making sure to go to the House Caperu gathering. I know I mentioned it last episode, so it's sort of fresh on my mind at least. I'm going to be making it to Ohio to the House Caperu gathering as something has come up. There is a strange coincidence of someone who is going to be there, and I am not currently at liberty to say because I do not believe, at least at this time, that it has been announced. So I don't know if it will be by Friday. And after Friday, I will make sure to see because if it is, I will 100% talk about it in the next episode. But there's a little bit of a coinky dink that has come up and has made me realize 1000% I will be going to Ohio at some point next year to a vampire gathering. It's going to be awesome. At this point, I've also decided, despite the fact that I don't like traveling alone, that I will probably be going regardless of whether or not I'm the only one who can go. So, it's been a strange day, and it's been strange in a good way, just unexpected. So I hope that your day, as you are listening to this, if it has been strange at all, was strange in a good way. Also today, I have a little extra information in the description of this episode. I will be sharing not only some of my childhood experiences, as you probably guessed from the title of this episode, but a friend of mine who I knew in childhood actually sent me some short stories from a paranormal experiences book that she is publishing. So I have included Diana's information because I totally love her writing style and I am excited to share her stories with you today as well. And I've actually got 2 of hers that I will be reading. And I also thought it appropriate that since we met when we were like 9 in 4th grade, that I read her stories in addition to sharing a childhood story of my own. Because I knew her at the time that some of it was the more frightening. It wasn't just a single instance or a single run-in for me, and mutual friends of ours, people that we both knew, were involved on my side. And had I known at the time that she and I were having similar experiences, well, first of all, I wouldn't have invited her to my house because the thing in my backyard was real upsetting. But, maybe at the same time I would have. Maybe we could have gone and done something together. And I'm sure that everything happens for a reason. And maybe it had to happen the way that it did so that we are friends now. I would have definitely had someone I could have talked to in a different way. And there's a part of me that's a little sad for 9 to 12-year-old me that didn't occur. But there's also a part of me that is very glad to have met her then because I knew somebody else who was going through similar things. School's rough. Elementary school is BS. And while I was homeschooled for most of it, there was 1 year that I was in public school, and my grandmother substitute taught, my mom substitute taught, and she and I were in the same class. And we always got along because she was always super sweet and super creative. And now she's a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. And I super recommend Dianah Brock's writing to you because she is lovely. I love her author's voice personally. The two stories of hers and then my story that I'm going to share today have been a while in the making, and were happening around about the same time. Also, a huge thank you to Dianah for sending me in her stories and letting me read something that she's actively going to have published very soon. I will definitely make sure that there is a link to her website and her Amazon site in the episode description, and I'm also going to put it on social media just in case you guys can't get it for some reason. I'm not entirely sure how all of the casting sites work, so I don't know if you can actually follow a link. So at ThatSpookyLifePodcast on Instagram, I will make sure to have her information there as well. Yeah, and let's get right into it. I'm just going to kick it off with my story. We'll see where we end up. So, my story for the day, it should come as no surprise that in addition to the tangible and physical echoes of the Civil War that affect the South still to this day, hell, even some of them are still like physically visible on the land and absolutely in society, there are also energetic and metaphysical echoes as well. Basically, most of us down here, which Christian, agnostic, even some atheists that I know, just kind of acknowledge, accept, and move on from the understanding you can't spit without hitting a ghost or a residual haunting or haunted place around here that likely has something to do with the Civil War. Lots of death, lots of pain, anger, hatred, fear, all the jazzy stuff that gives a place that certain spooky feel literally everywhere. Yeah, okay. Maybe not literally everywhere, but sometimes you'll walk around minding your own damn business and walk by something that just doesn't feel right. Like you're being watched and whatever's watching you is angry about it. Like I've traveled all over this country and been to the UK at this point. And outside the southern United States, it doesn't happen nearly as often in the same way. Stateside, it just doesn't happen as often. And in the UK, it feels much older, like more chill. Even when angry, it doesn't have the same, demand. There's like an urgency to the hauntings of the South that make my skin crawl in a completely different way that the boogans I ran into in the UK made it oogie. But that's a different story for a different day. My story for today involves multiple experiences, but with the same entity. So I don't remember like when I first actually noticed it. I was young, I know that. I was older than 4 because we had already moved up to Kingston. I never liked going in the backwoods behind my house, like at any point growing up. We were allowed to play and go back in there, back to the fence, which was, I think, like probably 2.5 acres fenced in. We had 5, so it was like half the property was fenced in. And we were in the middle of nowhere, up on top of a ridge, outside the town of Kingston that's like 3.5 miles in diameter and had maybe 700 people at most. If that, to be perfectly honest. But the few people that lived out that way tended to hunt deer and stuff, so it was a safety thing that we didn't go outside the fence. But it was just like a wire it wasn't chicken wire, it was the square wire fence. But it was still a fence. You couldn't really see it until you like ended up right on top of it, because it was in the woods. I remember always feeling like we were being watched when we were playing on the swing set in the backyard, which was a good 100 feet or more from the tree line. Like we had a cleared backyard with grass and everything, but it would always feel like right inside that tree line there was something watching you, and it was unnerving at best. We never saw anything. I mean, a couple of times we saw like a bobcat and numerous deer and things like that. And while I think my oldest brother noticed, he never really said anything. He just sort of brushed it off, calling me a chicken when I tried to press him for it. And that was just the obvious, I don't want to talk about it. I was like, okay, whatever. Only one friend of mine ever agreed that it was creepy. And she never outright said that she saw something, to my memory. She might have, because it's been a minute. But My best friend in elementary school, Sharon, was the one who was like, no, it's super creepy back there. Like, I can totally understand it. My other best friend at the time, Heather, helped my brothers convince me to go back there one time because she wanted me to face my fear because Heather was super sweet. And she was like, it's cool if you go back there and see that there's nothing there. Then you can overcome your fear and everybody can play in the woods and it'll be cool. So, obviously, she had the best intentions. And I was like, okay, maybe we can try that. Sure. And we went back there. It was the day after a birthday sleepover and it was cold. I remember we were all wearing jackets, which was weird because my birthday was in June, but we were wearing jackets. I don't know why. And I came face to face with this like apparition for the first time. And I completely froze in fear and started getting weepy. And when my brothers started teasing me, Heather completely shouted them down. They were being mean and that she was going to take me back to the house. And she did. And no one ever asked me to go back in the woods again. So I didn't. The super upsetting thing about this is the fact that in the broad daylight, I couldn't get a clear image of the apparition. There was a tree that had fallen in a storm, and it honestly, for all the world, looked like a mummified corpse hanging by its arms between two other trees. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I knew, logically, physically, it was a tree. But I also knew that something was watching me from exactly there because it was eye-catching. That something wasn't used to being seen and was as keenly aware of my ability to see it as I was of it watching me. I always knew it was a man, but I could never get like a full, and I think it's because I was purposely trying to shut it out because it terrified me, so I didn't want to see it, so I didn't actually try to see it. It could never come out of the wood line. I would not find out why until much later when I was in my mid-20s. The sequence of events that happened, maybe it was one of my brother's sleepovers because my birthday's in the summer, so we wouldn't have been wearing jackets. Maybe it was one of those sleepovers that like your parents tell your siblings that you can invite one friend and your siblings can each invite one friend. That's probably what happened. So that happened. No one ever asked me to go in the backwoods again. And I was like, okay, cool, thank you. God, I had to have been 10, 11, maybe 12. I think it was 10 or 11 at that point. Maybe 12. So when I was 15, we were still living there. I met through some crazy summer stock theater shenanigans, numerous lovely people, a couple of whom I still talk to this day. One of them was getting married the summer that I was 15 and asked me to play piano in their wedding. The catch was that their wedding was in Pennsylvania. I asked my mom. My mom said, sure, we can do that. So I practiced and practiced and practiced. I learned an entire new song. It was the Heart Asks Pleasure First from Michael Nyman's The Piano. It is a heinously complicated piece that I can only still play bits of. So we go up to Pennsylvania, and being obsessed with the Civil War as I was as a child, I begged my mother to stop by Gettysburg on the way home. And that will probably be an episode in and of itself at some point to give you an idea of how that went. And we come home and everything's really weird in the house. Like it feels strange. My grandmother had passed on approximately 3 years before. My dad had moved home from his contract job in Michigan, and he had taken over her sewing room as his office for working remotely because he was a programmer. Everything felt really, 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 really weird in the house. It didn't feel right. We walked inside and I knew something had changed. Didn't know what. So we get unpacked, shower, eat dinner, all that stuff, and go back to normal life the next day, so I had to go to sleep. Well, at this point, my dad was up late, working late hours, is what I had been told. And my mom was still sleeping in the master bedroom upstairs, down the hall from me and my brother's room. My oldest brother was staying in Rome because he did not go to the wedding with us. My youngest brother had gone with us and was asleep in the bedroom next door. And I read some before I go to sleep. And like a frickin' horror movie, I turn out my light when I'm super tired and ready to go to sleep. And first I thought I saw something outside my window. And then it was in the corner of my room. It was a young-ish man, not young for what I was at the time. He was probably early 20s. Sallow, cheeks shrunken in, wearing a blue Civil War uniform, so Union soldier, clutching his bayonet to his chest and looking at me terrified and just staring at me. And I tried to basically tell myself that, oh, I'm dreaming, it's because we went to Gettysburg, etc. But like, I knew I wasn't. He was there. He was looking at me. This was real time. This was not echoes and like my imagination. I knew what was happening. I was just trying to rationalize it away to myself. And eventually, after about 45 minutes of this, he takes a step forward and I learned how to fly. When I tell you that I leapt from my bed into the hallway, circumventing any and all floor between, I don't think my feet touched the floor but maybe 3 times, crossing what was probably an 18 to 25 foot hallway, and then like leapt into my mother's bed in a full grand jeté ballerina style, because I was in like the peak of my dance career at that point, under the covers and up to her back as if I was attempting to become a shell and she was a turtle. She, of course, startles awake and asks me what's wrong, and I tell her, nothing, I had a nightmare, I'm sleeping with you. I am 15, and to this day I have no shame over that, because my mother and my grandmother, if we would spend the night and sleep in their bed, never had any nightmares. It's a sense of security. But also, my grandma had the red phone to Jesus, like she had him on speed dial, and if you wanted to see your prayers be answered, you asked Miss Hyken to put you on her prayer list. My mother, I have a story about her and like a witch in a coven in Atlanta at some point. I'll have to get the details from her before I tell it. But basically, my mother would break curses by laughing at a bitch because she was like, you have no power over me. These were the women that I was raised by. So my mom gets real quiet when I'm like, nothing, it's a nightmare, I'm just going to sleep in here. 15, fancy myself an adult. Looking back, I was real cute, right? I was a child into my mid-20s. He's standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me. And I just pull my mom's cover up over my head and bury my face in her back, which she is terribly confused by because I am a horribly hot-natured individual. And while I enjoy cuddling, within like 3 minutes, I'm usually on the other side of the bed because I'm happy to be in the bed with you, but like I don't want to touch you because I'm hot. I stayed glued to her back all night. Well, come to find out that the weekend that we were going to Gettysburg was the first weekend that my father had cheated on my mother in the house, and it had done something to the energy of the house that took my mother a few weeks to get her shields and normal protections back in place. She apparently noticed it the minute she walked in the house too, but she had an idea of what was going on. I did not. My mom also had not anticipated that it would have gone out as far as the house. Now, I had never told anybody really, other than my 2 friends at the time, what sort of things I got from the backyard. And I had never really, at the time, been able to figure out what I was seeing was a Civil War soldier. So I hadn't articulated any of this, but my mom knew something was in the backyard that upset me. And it wasn't really hard to figure out that because of what had happened, whatever was in the backyard had now gotten into the house. I slept in... Hello, Isis. Isis decided to come tell you guys hello again, like she always does whenever I sit down to record. That's my computer. Please don't knock it off. Anyway, my mom figured out whatever was in the backyard had managed to get into the house and was terrifying me. I slept in my mother's room at 15 years old for like 2.5 weeks until finally the house felt better. She'd let me spend the night at a couple of friends' houses so that I could get away from it for a little while. And it was finally better, and he never showed his face in the house again. He was relocated back to the backyard, and I just elected not to go there. So, like, the closest I would go was the back deck, which was like a story up. We had 3 stories in the back with a daylight basement, and the porch was attached to what was the first story in the front, therefore second story in the back. And that was as far as I would go, because we had come far too close for my comfort. And it wasn't until I want to say like 23. I know that we were sitting in a Panera Bread, and I was talking about Gettysburg and the Civil War and our experiences at Gettysburg, and she asked me about that, and then she asked me about when we got home, and I finally told her what I experienced, and I was like, you're probably going to think I'm crazy. It's the whole reason I hadn't told you before now. And she just looks at me, ever pragmatic as my mother is, and said, well, I knew that something had bothered you, and I figured it was whatever was in the backyard that upset you so badly. But you were so terribly upset by it, I didn't want to press for details at the time. So I just let you sleep in my bed because it seemed to be the only thing I had available to me to do. And being a parent, I now understand it. And I know that in certain situations, you're just helpless. You don't know what to do for your kid in certain things if you don't understand why they're upset or what's going on. But I did look at my mother long before I was a parent in that Panera Bread and say, you could have asked, told me that you wouldn't thought I was crazy, and gotten me to tell you, because that validation would have made me feel better for a number of years. She was like, okay, noted. If we ever have a similar situation, I'll do just that. If I have weird experiences happen, I am going on an adult now. I'll just tell you. Be like, I don't care if you think I'm crazy. This shit just happened. And knowing my mom, she'd be like, yeah, that was weird. So my mom doesn't particularly have a path that she follows or anything like that. She considers herself to be spiritual, and she will go to church with my aunt, and she will notice things, and there's not really any particular denomination or calling that she identifies with. She just understands that there is more to this reality, that there is a subtle reality beside our own that we are attached to. And I really wish that I'd had the guts to tell my mom sooner the things that I was seeing, because I think that would have alleviated a lot of stress for me as a kid. But that is my story of the soldier on the property on which I grew up, and the accidental tormentor of my life from the time I was like 6 until we moved out when I was 17. So I've often thought that if I ever get a chance to go back and ask whoever owns the property now, be like, hey, my parents built this house, I used to live here. Is it cool if I walk around the property a little bit? Stuff like that. If he's still there, I would like to apologize, because I realized that he was just as scared as I was, and nobody had seen him in like 200 years. He was not at home. He was a Union soldier. He is lost, or was. Maybe he's moved on, but he was lost. He was scared. He was alone. And there was this little girl who was terrified of him, even though he wasn't even doing anything particularly terrifying other than just being there. When you're a kid, shit happens. If I ever get a chance to go back, I would like to apologize to him and maybe see if I could help him move on. But that's my story for today. As for our listener stories today, I am excited, as promised, to bring you 2 different stories by author Dianah Brock. And I have read these guys. It is crazy, and I just hope you're ready. I hope you're not listening after dark. I'm just going to say that because, I got the chills reading this. So, the first one that we are going to read today is called Sleepwalking After Midnight. And Dianah writes, one of my most puzzling encounters with the paranormal occurred when I was 11. I had moved in with my mom and stepdad about 7 miles from my grandparents' house out in the country on Barnsley Gardens Road in Adairsville, Georgia. This area is filled with haunted history, mostly revolving around Barnsley Gardens Resort and the fact that Sherman's army marched through the area. This area was very active during the Civil War, and those pieces of history contribute to the haunted history of this area. I'm going to pause to point out that, as I said earlier, we're all used to it. Like, you can't escape it down here, especially in the area that Dianah and I both grew up. It's just rife. I actually lived between Kingston and Barnsley Gardens, where she's talking about right now. Same area, same general principle. It's all over the place down here, and if you have any sort of spiritual sensitivity, you cannot get away from it. So, like many children, I had my quirks. I had an overactive imagination, but it worked in my favor. With no friends living close enough to walk to visit, my imagination often gave me the ability to entertain myself. With lots of woods around, a man-made pond, and the construction of a huge building going on behind our house, there was a lot to do when resources were minimal. Of course, if the weather was bad, raining and storming, I had plenty of books at my disposal, and my mom kept an ample supply of paper and pens. A few doors down from my stepdad's house, there was a church. It was a very short walking distance, of course, but a bit far for the experience I had one night. When I first moved in with my mom, I had to sleep on a pull-out bed in the living room until my stepdad finished building my bedroom onto the house. A few nights into being in my bedroom, I had turned in early. It was Friday night, and this was a rare weekend that I was home instead of visiting my daddy, grandmother, or one of my many cousins. As I slept, I dreamed about a woman coming into my bedroom and sitting at the foot of my bed. The room was cold, and I remember thinking this was odd as it was late spring, and in Georgia, that means the weather is really warm. This is so true. It's already hot by late spring. She appeared to be wearing a light-colored skirt suit, one that you would expect to see on one of the old ladies in church, the type with a knee-length skirt and a light blazer jacket pulled over a button-up blouse. I was kind of afraid, but not at her presence, just at the strangeness of the situation. I sat up in my bed and asked why she was there. The lady looked at me and smiled. Her smile eliminated any amount of fear that I had initially felt. I recall her telling me, "I'm just lonely. No one comes to visit me anymore, and you're one of the few people who have seen me in recent years that noticed." Of course, this is not verbatim, but a generalized construction of information for the purpose of writing this story. I remember feeling bad for her, knowing how it felt to feel lonely. If I wasn't with my daddy's side of the family, then I felt lonely most days. I recall her asking me if it was okay that she visited me, and I told her that it was. I remember her telling me that her name was Elizabeth. I also recall her asking me if I could visit sometime so that she didn't feel as lonely so much. I assured her that I would visit her if she told me where she lived. She didn't answer me, but disappeared instead. I shrugged my shoulders, confident at this point that I was merely experiencing some lucid dreaming, and laid back down on my pillow and closed my eyes, not thinking any more about the encounter. However, when I woke the next morning, I noticed, before opening my eyes, that I was no longer in my bed. I recognized the smell of grass and dirt at my nose and the familiar dampness of the morning dew beside my hand. I opened my eyes and was surprised to see that I was sleeping on top of a grave, long covered by green grass. I rubbed my eyes as I tried to focus through that all-too-familiar blur of waking up. It is important to note that I was also wearing my glasses, which was strange as well, because I never slept in my glasses. I was very protective of them as I hated not being able to see. I looked around me, and I noticed that the headstone of the grave on which I was sleeping belonged to a woman by the name of Elizabeth. I looked at her birth and death date and realized that her age of death was accurate for the woman whom had visited me in my room the night before. I thought back to what I thought had been nothing more than a conscious dream. I realized then that I hadn't been dreaming and that the visit had actually happened. What I found to be peculiar was how and why I had ended up in the cemetery. Granted, I did recall her asking me to visit her, and I thought this must have been the reason I was here. However, the how didn't make much sense to me. I was barefoot and still in my shorts and t-shirt that I'd slept in. Suddenly realizing that there was a good chance that my mom was awake and possibly looking for me, I panicked and stood up to head home. I knew this was going to be an awful walk as I was barefoot and very tender-footed for a southern kid in the country. I never ran around barefoot after stepping on a sharp rock and receiving a cut that was deep enough that I technically should have received stitches. As I began to walk towards the road to make my way to my house, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Thank you for visiting me." When I arrived home, I was relieved to find that my mother had just gotten up and was in the kitchen starting her pot of coffee for the day. She saw me when I came in through the entryway into the dining room and opened the kitchen. "Oh, you're up early for the weekend," she said as I walked by. I remember telling her something generic like, "Yeah, I fell asleep early reading," or something of the like that would easily explain my early rise. I never told my mom what happened, not until many years later, perhaps in my early 30s. That was when she told me that it was no surprise to her. Throughout the next couple of years after this experience, I did visit the grave of Elizabeth until I moved away from the area after my mother and stepdad separated. Sometimes when I'm in the area, I stop by to sit by her headstone, have a smoke, and talk to her, even though I haven't seen or heard her since. Ooh. So, I will tell you guys, when reading through this, I chatted with Diana in between reading stories, and I have told her that if we ever are in the area and have a day to do so, I would love to go visit Miss Elizabeth's grave with her, as it is also close to my old property, and maybe we can go talk to the folks that live in my house now and just have a ghost day. But that story is, the hair on my arms is standing up. Oof, I have chill bumps right now. But I have one more story for you guys, and if I am honest, I saved what I think is the best for last, or at least the most impactful. This one I have been thinking about nonstop since the first time I read it. And I'm not going to give any preamble here. I'm just going to dive right in and read Dianah's words because I think she does a really good job of painting some very vivid, very intense pictures. So, this one is called Ashes to Ashes, and Dianah writes, "My childhood was no stranger to the paranormal. I knew what ghosts were, but I didn't know then why I was so susceptible to their presence. I would discover many years later that I was gifted for the spirit world and came by my gift naturally and against my will. Looking back on my childhood, there were so many stories that now make sense to me. One of these encounters took place in my aunt's house when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My parents divorced when I was very young. My daddy, a modern-age-born rebel to law and order, didn't maintain a normal residence like the rest of the world. He lived from place to place, often in tents, moving from one location to another in various wooded locations. When the spring and the summer graced the world, we would camp out with our daddy close to my grandmother's house so that we still had access to showers and cooked meals during our visits. It was actually a lot of fun. I can guarantee that I camped out more than any other kid I knew in my childhood. However, when the weather was too cold to have small children bundled up in sleeping bags in tents in the woods at night, my daddy would house sit for one of my aunts, or we could visit with our other cousins for the weekend with him. One of these weekends, when the weather had just turned too cold for these campouts, my daddy had agreed to watch my Aunt Jeannie's house for her for the weekend in exchange for a place to keep my brother and me. Aunt Jeannie's house was a fun place for us to stay. My cousin Sharon stayed with our Aunt Darlene so much that she was almost never home, but she was also one of my older cousins that not only kept her toys forever, but didn't care that all the younger cousins played with her things. So there was an endless supply of tools to entertain. My Aunt Jeannie also kept lots of movies and cartoons in her house, so there was plenty to do. However, one of my favorite reasons for staying in Aunt Jeannie's house on the weekends was the fact that Sharon had a huge waterbed in her bedroom. I thought it was the coolest thing. As a small child with one big imagination, I was easily entertained, and it didn't take much for me to find the cool in many different things. Not to mention, the heated waterbed made for some cozy sleeping, and I loved it. Of course, my daddy hated the waterbed, but I was his princess and spoiled so rotten that if I had been a plum, old southern women couldn't have made a decent jam out of me. Lol, I haven't heard that phrase in so long. On one of these visits, just as my daddy had expected, I began pleading my case for sleeping in Sharon's room. One wouldn't think this would be an issue. Daddy could just sleep somewhere else and everyone would be comfortable. In theory, that would have been great, but to my sheltered self, one who shared a bedroom with my nanny when I was at home, was terrified of sleeping by myself. My little brother was no different. So of course this meant that Daddy would have to sleep with us, and his waterbed was definitely big enough to accommodate the three of us. Didn't take long for my brother and me to convince Daddy, once again, to give us our way. Looking back, this is probably the experience that taught me to listen to my daddy more often when he tried to tell me no. After dinner and after baths, Daddy said it was time for bed. I was okay with this, as it was waterbed time. One last 15-minute time period of giggling, jokes, and playtime before wrapping up in the blankets and going to sleep. My brother was still really little and had been known to roll off the bed, so Daddy always put him between us to prevent that from happening. I took the side near the wall, as I was too big to fall into the small space between the frame and the wall, and Daddy took the edge. I awoke in the middle of the night to the call of nature. This was no big deal. The room was dark, but my daddy was there, and I knew I was safe. My brother had rolled over closer to me at some point since we'd fallen asleep, so it was very easy to crawl over him. I did so with no problem, and he didn't even flinch. It was like a middle-of-the-night game for me, trying to sneak out of bed without waking my lightly sleeping brother. I turned to try once again, crawl over my daddy, and go to the bathroom. When I rolled over, I was horrified. There, lying in the bed with my little brother and me, was what appeared to be the deceased body of my daddy. I was horrified. The body lay there completely burned, eyes open, and mouth gaping open as well. My little imagination, that was known for reading material not approved for my age, began to think that my daddy had suffered from spontaneous human combustion in the middle of the night. Oh, that's not okay. Oh, the chills have begun. But then I had a thought. Daddy had told me so many times that my eyes could play tricks on me in the dark. That had to be what was happening. First, I covered my head with the blanket and counted to 10. When I removed the blanket and looked at my, quote, daddy again, nothing had changed. So I pinched myself. I was definitely awake, and the body still lay beside me. Ooh, that's all kinda not okay. Ooh, no. I really needed to pee, but I was also terrified to crawl over this body, even though the logical side of me was trying to make myself realize that it was just my daddy and I was being ridiculous. So I decided to do what any kid would do. I would touch the face. Girl, I love you. I would not do that. I would not touch it. You are far braver, especially at 6 or 7. I knew that when I touched the face, I would feel my daddy's scruffy beard, and he would probably snore before waking up startled that I had touched him. So I reached out, taking my thumb and index finger, and placed it on either side of the wide-open mouth. Just as quickly as I touched the face of the body that lay beside me, the face crumbled like ashes, and the fear rushed through my veins, burning, and fueled me to jump off the bed and take off running into the living room in the opposite direction of the bathroom. I was terrified. No kidding, anybody would be. Like, girl. Oh. My daddy had burned to death in the middle of the night, and my brother and I were all alone, and the phone service at my aunt's house was turned off. I ran as fast as my little legs would carry me down the small hallway and turned the corner for the opening to the living room. I could see the couch from the dim light given by the street light outside the window. In one swift leap, I jumped onto the couch, onto the blanket that was bunched up there, and pulled it quickly over my head, crying hysterically. Just as I covered my head, I heard a noise. I then noticed that I hadn't landed on the couch, but on my daddy, who had also crept out of the bed at some point and went to sleep on the couch. My daddy turned on the lamp and held me, trying to comfort me. Comfort was not something that would come, but instead scared me even more. I looked at my daddy and said, "If you're in here, then who's in the bed with Alan?" Oh no, oh God. My daddy flew off the couch, grabbed a baseball bat, and ran into Sharon's bedroom, afraid that someone had broken in and that his youngest son was in danger. No kidding, same fam. Good Lord. He turned on the light, and my little brother lay sleeping in the bed all alone. I went over to the bed and pulled the blankets back. There were no ashes there, no sign of what I knew I had seen. I began to tell my daddy my story, and he tried to convince me it was just a dream. I'm not sure how he calmed me enough to listen, but I managed to finally get to the bathroom. I refused to sleep in that bed again, and my daddy was grateful. He carefully pulled my brother out of the bed and carried him into my Aunt Jeannie's room, and that's where we slept the rest of the night and every night we ever spent there after that. I told this story again one night around a campfire with my family when I was in my late teens, early 20s. My daddy said that he remembered that night well, and that he thought, since I was older, it was okay to tell me the story behind that old house. He said that many years before my aunt had rented that home, it was once a funeral home. One night, after a wake, the house caught fire, with the undertaker sleeping in the house. The bedroom, the one that belonged to my cousin, was burned totally, and the undertaker died in the fire. He was burned to death. Hearing this story sent chills down my spine and further confirmed for me that I wasn't simply having paranormal experiences, but that for some reason these spirits were drawn to me. Not only did I find out about the house's previous purpose as a funeral home, which explained many dreams and visions I'd experienced as a child, but I also learned that the entire house was not destroyed in the fire. Some of the wood was used to rebuild the home. Taking everything that I had learned about the paranormal into consideration, I've concluded that this place is haunted. Considering I didn't communicate with this spirit, nor did he try to communicate, I believe that this house is host to a residual haunting, one where the memory of a tragic event replays night after night. Oh, my Lord. I can't even, and I sound terribly Southern at the moment because I am all up in my feels and have chills on my body, literally head to toe. That kind of thing is terrifying. I have not had something quite so close happen. I've had different things happen to me that scared me that badly, but not nearly like, oh, I'm just gonna roll over and crawl over my parent. Oh my God, that's not my parent, and or my parent is dead, or no. Whew. I cannot wait to read the entirety of this book. It will be coming out soon. I will make sure that in the description you guys have Diana's information for social media. And I highly recommend, if you enjoy this podcast and if you enjoy paranormal experiences of others and crazy run-ins with paranormal and things we cannot explain, please check out her books. And I love her author's voice. I can picture so vividly in my head everything in both of these stories. And I am looking forward to reading the rest of the book when it comes out. So thank you, Diana, for sharing your stories with this podcast and with me. I am thrilled that you are one of my listeners. I feel very special for that. And I cannot wait to maybe share more of your stories in the future. I have very much enjoyed both Ashes to Ashes and Sleepwalking After Midnight. So I look forward to reading many more stories of yours in the future. Thank you all for joining us on this wonderfully spooky episode of That Spooky Life. If you have a paranormal story you would like to share and have me read, please send all of your stories to ThatSpookyLifePodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out my Instagram at ThatSpookyLifePodcast. I also have a Twitter at ThatSpookyLife. If you guys want a Facebook group set privately so that the world doesn't have to know your paranormal spooky business, please let me know. I'd be happy to do that. I haven't done it yet because I don't know if we have enough interest for something like that. But that is something that I'm willing to do in the future if you guys want it. That brings us to the end of this episode. Again, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next Friday with some new spooky paranormal experiences. And until then, keep living that spooky life. Bye.